All right, 7.6c, we're going to talk about again. Beginning algebra, chapter 7 is rational expressions. Chapter 7.6 is rational equations. This is our C video, our third video, and we're going to essentially be solving another rational equation. It's going to be a little more complicated, but we're going to see what steps we need to take. So let's see, here's our steps again. If we have a rational equation, rational means fractional. If we've got a fractional equation, equations have an equal sign. So if we've got an equal sign with rationals means any kind of polynomial fractions, then take these steps. Number one, what's the lowest common denominator? Lowest common denominator includes every single factor from every single denominator raised to the highest power. Then we've got to multiply. Step number two, or the important next step, is to multiply all terms in the equation by the lowest common denominator. Step number four, then you should have a simpler equation to work with, and you can solve the resulting equation. Then we've got to check the potential solutions in the original equation. Essentially, is the equation a restricted value? Hang on a second. So let's take a look at an example. So here we've got an equation. It says solve the equation. So what does our instructions say? Solve the equation. If we're given something like this, we'd have to say, all right, well, let's see. I've got a rational fractional equation. Because I do have that, I have to say I've got to find my lowest common denominator. What's my lowest common denominator? It includes every single factor from every single denominator raised to the highest power. My denominator here is over 1. I've got to have a p, and I've got to have a p to the highest power of 2, p squared. Essentially, we could factor that p squared into p times p, but p squared is going to be just enough, or is going to be adequate to determine what our lowest common denominator is. It's got to be p squared. So now we've got to multiply. Now we've determined our lowest common denominator. Because we've got rational equals sign or rational equations, we can multiply by our lowest common denominator. So we multiply every single term by our lowest common denominator. Here's my blue term times my lowest common denominator of p squared. Here's my hopefully green term. Hang on a second. Here's my green term. That's not green term. Here's my green term. There. Multiplied by my lowest common denominator of p squared. Here's my hopefully black term. There. Multiplied by my lowest common denominator of p squared. So now, because I've got a rational equation, I can say I can multiply by my lowest common denominator. So if I multiply through, I'm going to go back to my blue equation, or sorry, my blue term, my first term, and say 1 times p squared should give me, well, p squared. Minus my green term, 4 over p times p squared over 1 if you need to think about that. That's a 1 right there. P cancels with p squared to give me just a p in my numerator, and my term becomes 4p. 4 times p squared divided by p is 4p, equals my black term becomes negative 3 over p squared times p squared. Well, the p squareds cancel out because it's p squared over 1. P squareds cancel out, and I've got just a negative 3. And now we've got a simple equation that we just solve. So after we determine that we've got a rational equation, number one, find our lowest common denominator, multiply by our lowest common denominator to get a simpler equation, and now we solve. To solve an equation with a squared term, we have to move everything to the left side, and then factor everything on the left side equal to 0. So I'm going to move everything on the left side, or everything to the left side, by adding 3 over here, and I'm going to add 3 over here, and I will get p squared minus 4p plus 3 equals 0. Now we've got to factor the left side. If we factor the left side again, if I've got 1 p squared, if my a is 1, I'm always going to recommend that you use trial and error method. You can use AC method if you want, but it seems to be really long. So if I use the trial and error method, I'm going to put a p here, because p squared factors to p and p. And now I play around with my plus 3. Well, they both have to be either plus plus or minus minus, because if the second sign is a sum, then these have to be the same. So plus means it's either a plus plus or minus minus. It has to be a minus minus because it adds up to a negative here. So it's negative something and negative something, and now we've got just to factor the 3. 3 becomes either 1 and 3 or 3 and 1. So there's my factorization, p minus 3 times p minus 1. And if we FOIL it out, first outside, inside, last, first times first is p squared, that's okay. Inside terms are minus 3p, outside term is minus p. So minus 3p plus a minus 1p gives me negative 4p, so that's okay. And now my last term, negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3, so that all checks out, so I've factored it correctly. So now, because we know that either p minus, well, our multiplication is p minus 3 times p minus 1 equals 0. So either p minus 3 is equal to 0, or p minus 1 is equal to 0. And then we can write those out. P minus 3 equals 0, or p minus 1 equals 0. And then we just solve our little mini equations here. We add 3 to the left side and add 3 to the right side. And we get p equals 3. Or add 1 to the left side, add 1 to the right side, we get p equals 1. So either p equals 3 or p equals 1. And now we go back and we double check this in our original equation, especially in our denominators, to say, if we use p equals 3 or p equals 1, would that create a division by 0? And would that be then a restricted value that we've talked about? It is not, because if we put 3 or 1 into our equation, then this would be 1 or 3, and this would be 1 or 9, and we're dividing by either 1 or 3 here, or dividing by 1 or 9 here, and that's not a restricted value, that's not a problem, that's just simply part of the equation. So there's our equation, there's our solution, and we're done.